what's going on, everybody? My name is Blue Ridge Wargaming, and I'm here to talk to you today about the Realms of Magic. Reason for this is I just want to kind of go over a general overview of each of the spell lores, but also go a little bit more in depth with why you would use them, who they're really best for, and sort of just my thoughts and opinions on the matter. So let's go ahead and check it out. We have an exercising beam. Basically, it is a casting value of 6. You pick an enemy unit within 12 inches of the caster that's visible. Basically, that unit suffers D3 mortal wounds. If the enemy units are either demon or death, they suffer D6 mortal wounds instead. This will be really good for somebody who sees themselves facing either a lot of death or demon type players. This particular spell is very good. Basically, it just gives you on a 6-up the ability to do a more powerful version of, I guess, what the Arcane Bolt used to be. But now, with the addition of the fact that if you are attacking either demons, demons of chaos, or just, I guess, demons in general, or you are attacking death units, you will be doing D6 mortal wounds instead. So for a casting value of 6 spell, even though it is only a range of 12 inches, if you do find yourself as a basically force of order and you are going to be facing a lot of these either demons or death, then I don't see why this wouldn't be something to sort of take in your arsenal, especially if you do have multiple mages or if you do have something sort of along the lines of a powerful mage who can either go through maybe either as a lore master or something of the sort. The Light of Battle. Basically, the Light of Battle has a casting value of 5. What you do is you pick a unit, a friendly unit within 18 inches of the caster. That unit does not take battle shock tests until your next hero phase. This is very good for either forces of order that have a lot of either humans, or if you just have a bunch of either really low bravery units that may be too far away from Inspiring Presence or something of the sort, something where they'll just sort of need a little bit of that extra help, or if you expect heavy casualties. As a Skaven player, definitely when it comes to battle shock, that is the new bane of my existence, because when it comes to losing bodies, sure, you know, with Skaven, since you don't necessarily have a lot of armor saves, basically it winds up being that whatever attacks wind up wounding usually will wind up actually doing damage. And if you can wind up doing something where that damage doesn't translate over because you have a bravery of either 6 or less and you lost 20 on the combat, that can definitely help, especially if you have only 20 men left, and you know that could absolutely just ruin a unit regardless of however many wounds they may actually have. So the ability to completely bypass a battle shock test is actually pretty valuable for a lot of units, especially, of course, the ones that have either low bravery or, in turn, you're expecting huge casualties. Vengeful Illumination. It has a casting value of 7. Basically, if it is successfully cast, you get to pick a unit within 18 inches of the caster that is visible to them. Add 1 to hit rolls for attacks made with missile weapons that target that unit until your next hero phase. Who is this good for? Also, as a Skaven player, I do play a few other races. I do a mixed Grand Allegiance of Order. I also do Wanderers. I do Tempest Eye in the Cities of Sigmar. And I do also do the Living City. And with the Mixed Forces of Order, I basically just have all elves. So with this, if you do have ranged units, but you have one unit that is a serious threat to you, you either have multiple ranged units or something, whether it be artillery or people with bows, muskets, what have you. This is particularly good because if you could imagine, if I were to put basically if this were just a benefit put to one unit on my side, you would have to cast and successfully cast to buff each one of these individual units. The wonderful thing about this is it actually takes away the need to do multiple castings, and it just makes it so that that unit, whatever hits that unit, has those benefits to it. This is extremely good in all scenarios, probably equally as good, just really depending on the rend and the damage characteristic of the missile weapons themselves. If you are going against somebody who has, of course, a lot of armor, this can be very good because you're going to be able to hit better. But that just makes it also good because everybody who is able to shoot, you don't have to prioritize necessarily them, you just prioritize who you're trying to attack and do the most damage on. So instead of maybe buffing up 5 units, you just sort of cast this buff on an enemy unit, and boom, you're golden with all of those units that you may have as shooters, which is really good, especially if you wind up doing a lot of small specialized shooting units. That's perfect. So that's definitely something that you sort of have to think of. Of course, units that have either no armor save whatsoever, or if it has a armor save that your rend characteristic just negates, any wounds that wind up going through, they're going to wind up presumably doing damage to the actual unit themselves, thus going into battle shock, thus going into a bunch of other things. So very, very useful if you're using it in the right scenario. Aetheric Net. So the casting value of this is on a 6. If successfully cast, pick a point on the battlefield within 18 inches of the caster. Then you roll a dice for each unit, whether it's friend or foe, within 3 inches of that point. On a 4-up, that unit suffers 1 mortal wound, and its move characteristic is halved until your next hero phase. So this is going to be very good, especially if you're going against a either faster army or a, let's say, just against orcs. I mean, that's huge against orcs, because with a lot of orc lists that you're going to be going against, they're going to want to come up and beat you up. Like, they're going to want to charge as fast as possible, and they're going to want to touch you and punch your face in. So if you can do something like this where you're limiting their movement, of course, if you're going against, say, either dwarves or maybe somebody who doesn't even have cavalry, sure, it could potentially do quite a bit of, it could be a nuisance for them and their positioning, but primarily this is going to be used against fast units. 1 mortal wound, not awesome, especially if it's on a 4-up. But if you can wind up knocking their movement characteristic in half, or if it's a flyer or something of the sort, then they're basically balanced in a way so that they have certain advantages and disadvantages because they have the advantage of being able to move. So if you, of course, are able to cripple that, or you're able to have that aspect of them, presumably it could turn out in your favor. Especially against flyers or especially against cavalry. Also, as Skaven, I do have a lot of giant rats, usually, that I'm running. So if I had a bunch of giant rats and they had all of their movement halved, they do have a general movement of 8 inches. If it gets halved to 4 inches, that's tough. That's really tough. And then the fact that giant rats have no armor save, they die in droves and don't necessarily dish out nearly as many wounds. They're more of just sort of a nuisance. This could be something that almost entirely takes them out of the game. And then on top of that, if you are combining things like battle shock, you could completely pit an entire unit of, let's say it's 40 giant rats, you kill 10 of them on a volley, and then also you had gotten that spell off. So until your next hero phase, they're only able to move up to 4 inches with the choice of either a run or a charge if they're within range, which presumably not, or who knows, maybe even. But then on top of that, they took 10, then they're going to do Battle Shock test, probably lose at least half as many as they lost from that 10, just because their bravery characteristic, whether it be at a solid 6 or whether it doubled to a 12, still they're going to wind up having some that do fleet. And then on top of that, if you do 2 rounds killing only 10 on a shooting volley, or you wind up getting into close combat with them with just say 1 guy, if you can pump out 10 wounds on a giant rat unit, they're almost always going to explode. They're just not able to handle that. But if you ignore them, then they're going to come up behind you, and just based off of the sheer number of attacks, they are going to wound you. The Healing Glow. So Healing Glow has a casting value of 7. If it is successfully cast, pick a friendly unit within 6 inches of the caster, and that is visible to them. You then heal D3 wounds. The benefit for this is it is an extra healing spell. So if you wind up being somebody like me where I have Wanderers, and let's just say you have a Spellweaver. So initially a Spellweaver will have the spell that says you get to get back D3 slain models in the unit, which is fantastic. If you are able to have a Spellweaver with these 2 spells, it's going to be insane, because you're just going to be able to, give somebody a little bit more health that otherwise they wouldn't be able to, and presuming, especially with elves, any single bit of that wound characteristic really, really helps, because they're squishy and they are gauged in a sense that they're going to do a lot of damage output or a lot of nonsense. They may only have 5 wounds and like garbage saves. So if you're able to really fight and either bring back slain models in the case of the Spellweaver, or if you're able to use this to get D3 wounds, it's always great to get back D3 wounds, especially on a 7. And last but not least, Banishment. This one is my absolute favorite. So what you do is it has a casting value of 8. If it's successfully cast, you get to pick an enemy unit within 12 inches of the caster that is visible to them. You then remove that unit from the battlefield, and then you set it up again more than 9 inches from any models from the caster's army, and 24 inches or more from the caster. This is absolutely huge. Let's say you have a Hell Pit Abomination who is coming in and just seriously about to wreck everything. If you do this banishment, you just completely put their powerhouse on the other side of the map. Amazing. It's going to take at least 2 rounds for them to get back into combat. And then by then, elves are so agile, nimble, whatever you want to call it. That's just absolutely huge. At that point in time, if I'm able to get that off, I basically control the game, because I'm able to pick up their absolute powerhouse and remove it from where literally the situation where they need it the most. Absolutely invaluable. Of the spell lores, Hyish is definitely one of my favorites. Probably, I would say it's in top 3. I wouldn't go as far as to say top 5, but I would say top 3. That was a little bit of an explanation of the lore Hyish. I hope going over it a little bit sort of gives you an understanding of how these spells work, who would be using them, and what scenarios would be best for you to actually go ahead and capitalize off of these amazing abilities that this spell lore gives you.